We've got Adam Davies here.
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, first of all. Talk about the fact that it's amazing to be in Texas. I've always wanted to come to Texas. I was telling Craig how much I wanted to come to Texas. And there were two early impressions I had as a Brit. I'm from Northern England, from Manchester of Texas. The first thing I had was obviously the Dallas and JR and all of that lot. That was my first influence of Texas. My second influence of Texas, when I was 14 years old, they had a feature on the Dallas Cowboys. And I saw some of the cheerleaders in Texas. And I said to my dad at 14, I said, I want to come to Texas, Dad. And he said, you're going to have to wait. And here I am today. And I've been overwhelmed by the hospitality in Texas. Everyone's been lovely, very kind. Craig's been an awesome host and shown me some amazing food as well. And I feel like I've ate like 100 pounds of meat already, and I've been here like 24 hours. So it's been awesome. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about my expeditions. But first of all, who I am. I do expeditions all over the world. I've been, you name it, I've been there, and I can talk to you about that tomorrow. But I've not just looked for Yetis in Nepal. I've been to the Congo and looked for things like the Makili Mamembe, the Congo dinosaur, looked for evidence of those. I've been to the Almas in Russia, Mongolia. Jeff and I made a film in China, which I was really proud of. And Jeff will talk about that a bit tomorrow, and I will too. I've been to, oh gosh, you name it, I've been there. Mongolia, deserts, mountains, jungles. I've been all over the world. Now, one of the things that my friends used to say to me is, you know what, you're never going to get a girlfriend, Adam, because you drive that beat-up old car because you spend all your money on expeditions. But I don't regret it, you know, those have been the things that I've wanted to do. Those have been my passions over the years. So it's been very important that I've translated my passions out both in the expeditions I've done and the films I've made. And all the time, the bête noire, the quintessential point for me is because I'm interested in getting possible scientific evidence of these creatures which can be analysed. I think I know who I am, and what I'd say is I'm an amateur researcher who looks to credible scientific sources to get that tipping point, to get that balance, so that reputable scientists like Jeff and like Todd Dissertel will look at the evidence. And I think that that's really important as a starting point of what we can achieve. So when I talk to you about the Yeti, that's the contextual framework in which I wish to operate when I talk to you about that. So, I'll answer questions at the end, of course I will, but that's what I'm driven by. I'm not there to have a special relationship with something mystical. I'm there to get credible scientific evidence which is independently, scientifically corroborated by reputable scientists. And that's always been my benchmark, and I would suggest to you that that's a very good one for your own research and your own research purposes. So it's very, very important. But as I say, I've been all over the world for many, many years. I'm very lucky to be here because I'm still alive. I've taken some enormous life risks. I've only got a few scars, and none of them you can see. My pretty face is still intact, but I do have quite a few scars, but they're all underneath this grey visage here. In terms of what I did, in terms of my profession, one of the things I can say to you, because I've left it now, but I spent many years cross-examining people. I worked for the British government. That was what my main job, and I had security clearance there. But my expertise was cross-examining eyewitnesses, assessing credibility. I have a postgrad in law and my original degrees in history. But I had I had a security clearance, and as a result of that, I had to approach things in a methodical way, not least because I had to maintain that. So that was very important as well. And I just wanted to give a little bit of my background and framework to the expeditions that I've done.
Now you don't have to kill us if you tell.
No, I don't now. I am, Nick Redfern would probably say he's a man in black, and who am I to judge that? But that was a little bit about the sort of stuff I did. So that's the framework I operated in. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Yeti. I'm going to set the context. I'm not going to talk a lot about the history of the Yeti, but there's a few important points I want to mention before we come on to the films that I've done. And I'm going to set the context of the Yeti, the last one with Josh Gates I did. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Monster Quest one before that, because it sets the scene for what I wanted to achieve in the film I did with Josh. So in terms of the expeditions themselves, it's very important when we look at that, we look at the history. I think that's very important when I decide whether I want to do an expedition. What sort of history has it got? If it's just popped up in the last 20 or 30 years, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in plastic Yetis or plastic Bigfoots, all of those sort of things I don't care about. But the thing that I'd say to you in relation to the Yeti is the stories go back not just decades, not just hundreds of years, but thousands of years. There are thousands and thousands of years of history of this creature. Some of the first writings, some of the first things in print, for example, in China, talk about a wild man that lives in the mountains, talk about a Yeti, yeah? And this predates many of the modern religions that we see today. So there's always been this notion. I mean, one of the old shamanistic religions talks about using a Yeti or a wild man in one of their potions. So this has this historical lineage, and from my background in history, I'm interested in the plausibility of that. Secondly, with the Yeti, when I'm assessing expeditions, I think it's important to look at the ecosystem. So could this area support the notion, could it support the notion of a large bipedal primate living in that area? So those are my starting points, because as I said to you, this is on my own time and my own money nearly all of the time, yeah? I've done films and I've really enjoyed them. I love doing them. But I'm spending my own dollar on this, or my own pound, I should say, being British. But that's what I'm doing. So it's very important to assess all of these things. Now, let's turn to the Yeti. The Yeti is one of the most iconic, I think, of all the cryptids. It sits right up there with Bigfoot, and I think the two of them are paralleled, and I think the only other one that you could, if you were doing a top 3 of cryptids, would be the Loch Ness Monster in terms of gravity. I've looked them all, but you expect that. But again, it's all about the evidence. Now, when the first time I went to Nepal was in 2009, and I did a Monster Quest film there, and it's called The Abominable Snowman. You can Google it for free. I think it's relevant to this story because it brings out what I wanted to achieve in the Expedition Unknown show. And in that, I was, one of the things that some of the people who've made films, for example, Ken, who's here tonight, will say is, you don't have a lot of editorial control. And I didn't in some of those, so I was working with a really good guy who's a friend of mine, Jared McGilliard, and he said, we're going to do this Yeti film, and we're going to talk about this and investigate it all. And I wanted to work in what's called the Goldilocks zone. So my attitude towards that was, if the Yeti is around, the most likely place it will be is between, roughly speaking, 6,000 to about 13,000 feet. So we're talking about the tree line, and we're talking about the forests and all of that lot. Now, I know that, this is my view, but I know that prints, really good prints, have been found at higher altitude. For example, the Shipton prints in 1951. But my view was that the Yeti would be traversing high-level passes, so they were found about 90,000 feet, to move into the lower areas, yeah? In a similar way, I think, to the way that mountain gorillas live in high-level altitudes. And one of the things I would say is that I've been blessed to see a lot of the big primates in the wild. So I've seen orangutans, I've seen gorillas. I mean, one of the best memories I have was on Lake Tele when it was really hard getting through Lake Tele, trudging and trudging and trudging. And there's a story about a monkey, which Craig has given me permission to tell, which I'll tell at the end of this talk. When I was there, I got to Lake Tele and I was covered in cuts. And I looked up, and above me is a gorilla picking its nose on top of a tree as I'm doing it. And I'm like, this is why I came, man. This is why I came. I'm covered in butterflies, and there's a gorilla there. But I have seen all of that behavior. I've seen orangs. The first time I saw an orangutan in Sumatra, so I was looking for something called the orang pendek, I laughed because this bright orange fuzzball comes swinging through the trees, and I was like, shit, there's no way that looks like something from a cartoon. But the reason I mention that is because that's a real large primate, yeah, which seems implausible, but actually exists, and orangs have very, very high intelligence level. Yeah, the things that they're capable of, that's a whole talk for another time. But you would be amazed, for example, the level of sign language sophistication when they're taught it is incredible, all of these things. So let's turn to Nepal. We've talked a little bit about the background and the history. I presume most of you know the general area of Nepal. It's in the Himalayas. It's a very high. Obviously, you've got the mountains. And it's stretched down to Chitwan, which is plains where there's tigers still. And I like tigers. I've got tiger prints, and I've been very close to tigers, so I like all of that. But it's mountainous kingdom, and obviously you've got Bhutan on one side, and there's a lot of history about Bhutan. And I sent Josh off to Bhutan after. You've seen a couple of the episodes, most of you, of the Expedition Unknown, but you'll see him go to Bhutan, and I wanted to send him there, and there are reasons why. And then, and obviously you've got India on one side as well. So it's a sort of wedged in kingdom because of the ice flow that's caused those mountains, those amazing peaks. Now, when we talked about, the Monster Quest film, I talked about wanting to go in the Goldilocks zone. So I said to Jared, to cut back, I said to Jared, well, you know, I want to go in the forests, yeah. And there was myself and Ian Redmond, who's the UN ambassador for gorillas. He's a cool guy, and he said, oh no, buddy, you're going way up there, up this mountain. You're not going in the forest. So I had to tell Ian how to work the camera traps, and there I was up the mountain. Now, I didn't have it. I was with Mr. Yagihara. So those of you who've seen the Expedition Unknown, you'll know why he's in there. He's a Japanese mountaineer, really good guy, incredible mountaineer. And he came up the mountainside with me. He came up to go up there and go at high altitude. And the Sherpa MB is saying to us as we're going up, he says, we're at altitude, no drinking, no smoking, relax, don't do this, don't do that, yeah? Yagihara gets on top of the mountain, base camps at 11,200 feet, and obviously we went much higher. And the first night, Yagihara's caned a packet of cigarettes and half a bottle of whiskey, and he's going, oh, screw the Sherpa, I'm just going to do whatever I want, you know. But he's an awesome mountaineer, and you saw him, if you saw Expedition Unknown, one of the reasons I thought it was a good idea to introduce him was because of some of the evidence that he has assimilated. So we go up this mountain, and as we're going up the mountain, there's a very hard ice flow on one side. I mean, it's rock solid. And it really was one of those, it sounds cliched, but it's true, one of those one slip and you are dead moments, yeah? I looked, as I was going through this ice flow like this, I'm moving like this, and there was a sheer ice flow, and I realized that the ice was so compacted, I wouldn't be able to get my ice axe in and do a roll, because I've done mountaineering before, and you do a roll, get your ice axe in. I realized I wouldn't be able to do that. And I thought to myself, well, if I do slip, it'll take about 30 seconds to die, yeah, as I do go off this mountain. And Jared, who's the producer, he's coming up and he's giving me this egg. He said, oh, we're running out of food and all this, so he gives me this egg. And he said, shit, you took my last egg. That was Egg Hill, and I was busted, yeah? So we get up to the top, and there's a scene in that where we go to higher altitude, and myself and Yagihara go up to the higher altitudes because we were investigating something, potential prints, but in fact they were snow rolls. But we investigated up, and there's this lovely scene, and Jeff and I have talked about it before, but sometimes, and I think it's important for TV, sometimes there are clips that they leave out, which I wish they'd introduced. And MB, who was the Sherpa there, he said to me, he talked to me about the dangers of mountaineering, because the cameraman had climbed Everest twice. He was the first person to climb Everest twice within a short space of time. I think it was a couple of weeks he climbed it because he had to do some filming there. And MB said that he was there and suddenly he was hit by an avalanche. He didn't know it was coming, suddenly he was hit by an avalanche. And he struggled a bit and he tried to breathe, and then he realized that he said, I just prepared myself for death. And he said, I just relaxed, prepared myself for death, and suddenly I was yanked out of the snow. And of the 8 people in the avalanche, only 5 people survived, yeah? And it was an amazing story. And he cried, you know, he had all this emotion, he cried. I thought, that's a great cut. They didn't use it for the show. I was like, no. But I just thought it was a great cut, and I wanted to tell you that because as we got down to base camp, just after that, we had the very place where I'd been standing, I'd been filming that, the next day an avalanche hit, yeah? So we would have been boom. But I think it's important when we talk about the expeditions, about the risks we take. And also, you know, when I'm communicating those to you, it doesn't matter how good you are or how professional you are, sometimes you can just die on these mountains. And what, Yagihara told me, and I'll talk about him a little bit more because you saw him on Expedition Unknown, about how his teacher had died very near to a spot where we were filming of altitude sickness. He passed away at that point. And I'd make that point because I've been quite lucky I don't suffer from altitude sickness, but you never know, yeah? And I've seen some people I've known, good mountaineers, who passed away at those sort of altitudes. So you kind of think, well, why do you do the crazy stuff that you do? And I think it's because, one of the things I'd say to you is because you feel so alive, yeah? I've never felt so alive as when I'm in these situations and I'm taking these risks, because I passionately believe in some of the existence of these cryptids, and it's not my belief that matters, but I passionately believe in them, that motivates me to do these things and to take these risks. So, that was an amazing experience. But obviously in that film, we eventually managed to come down from the mountains, and it was very hard slogging down because the helicopter was going to land to do as a pickup. And it was too windy and dangerous, so it came away. So there's this moment where we're all going, yay, the helicopter's here. Then it turns around, the pilot shakes his head, goes like that, and we'll go, no, no, looking down at the mountain thing. I've got to go down, I've got to go back through that horrible ice flow again and do that, Oh, so that was, I mean, it's an amazing place. And when you're doing all that hard physical slog, when I look out and I can see the panorama of the Himalayas, I just think, oh, it's all worthwhile. But you do become a bit of an adrenaline junkie, so I'd caution against doing everything I've done. In that sense, I'd caveat it, because we did actually get a helicopter at the bottom of the mountain, and I was so buzzed up, I said to the pilot, I said, oh, let's see what we can do. Let's see what the helicopter can do. So the pilot said, yeah, okay. So he shoots the helicopter up and then goes boom like that, plummets it down as fast as we can down through the mountain ranges. I'm going, yeah, and Ian's going to me, Adam, can you just tell him to slow down and chill out? But it was an amazing experience. So if you haven't seen that film, you can Google it again, Monster Quest Abominable Snowman. I advise you to do it because it does set the background to what I wanted to achieve in the Expedition Unknown, and that's why I've talked about it a little. So when it came to time to do the Expedition Unknown, the only thing I had a great experience in that part, and that's western Nepal. That's around Dalagari 4, because we went up pretty high altitude, went over 15,000 feet when we were doing the climbs. But it was a very dangerous expedition. I think that was the most dangerous Monster Quest shoot without a doubt. We were glad we were alive at the end, and we went to Rum Doodle, which you probably saw in the Expedition Unknown at the end of that. And we did drink quite a bit. I'm not ashamed to say we did. We partied, and we got one of those big Yeti Footprint signed for our expedition because we'd achieved quite a lot. But one of the things that I was conscious of when I went there was I hadn't found a lot of recent sightings in that area. I'd found people, older generation people, telling me stories about the Yeti, but I hadn't found any recent sightings of it. So I was a bit, is it still around? We worry about the viability of these things. They're obviously, I think, they're very rare creatures. Is it beyond the point of extinction? Have they passed away? And I was worried about that a little bit. So anyway, it comes to the time for the Expedition Unknown shoot, and I got contacted by a producer, Natalie Hewson, who I'd done Finding Bigfoot in Sumatra with Natalie, and I'd had a great time doing that with her. I got on very well with her. She was really nice to me. She said, "Oh, we're doing this Expedition Unknown. Would you be interested?" I said, "Well, I'm going to San Diego to get married. I don't think I can do it." She said, "Oh, just come and have a chat with us, on camera." So I'd just come back from work. I said, in my job, I worked for Border Force and I wore a uniform, and I was used to being called sir all day. I've not been called sir since I've been here. I did suggest it to my new wife. I said, "Why don't you call me sir?" That went down very well. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. So nobody's called me sir. But I had quite a formal job, and as a consequence of that, the reason I'm saying that is because I wore a uniform all the time. I was in this crappy old t-shirt, and all of a sudden there's like 4 really pretty girls, ladies I should say, producers, all are saying, "Oh, we want you for the show, we want you for the show." And I was like, "Oh no, I look rough, I should have got dressed." But they said, "Oh, well, you're good enough, yeah." So I ended up doing the show. And they said to me, well, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I thought I'd take a punt. And I said, well, I'd like to go to the east of Nepal, to that sort of area, because I thought, well, there's not been recent sightings in the west, but there have been a concentrations of sightings towards the east of Nepal. Maybe it's just possible if we go off the beaten track that we might be able to find some tangible evidence, yeah? And obviously they sent out people to research that area, but I chose that area to do the expedition, yeah? So that was the area I wanted to do. And Josh got to go off to Bhutan after me. I've always wanted to go to Bhutan, and Jeff and I were talking about going to Bhutan. Always wanted to go. I couldn't go because obviously I had other priorities which were more important, just in case my wife listens to this recording. But I had to go off to Bhutan. I couldn't go to Bhutan, but I wish I had, and maybe one day I'll go. But you'll see him in later episodes go off to Bhutan and do expedition there. So I wanted to go to the eastern part of Nepal. So we set up. There's obviously research that goes into these things before we do a film without going on too much. And I can't reveal before you ask what happened at the end of the film. I'm not allowed to. It's unprofessional. So you'll have to watch that last bit. But I can tell you and talk about the background of what's happened, subsequently and where we are. And so we set off. And you see Yagihara at the beginning of that, and you see all of that. And then we go off to Lukla. And he talks about Lukla as being the most dangerous airport in the world. And it really is. It really is that bad. Now, I've been to the Congo. I've been in some dreadful planes. I was once on a plane, an old Anatov in the Congo. And right sat next to me was a goat. And the goat was all the way through it. And then I looked over it. And then this mist comes out into the cockpit, and it turns out it was the cooling system of the plane, really. And that plane subsequently crashed in the CAR, the Central African Republic, not so long after I was in it. Really bad. But the airport itself is extremely dangerous. It's on a mountainside, it's on a very sheer cliff, and there's a very short runway. And what you probably didn't see in the film, and you saw the graphics in the film, but just show how dangerous it is when they go into land and take off. But they're constantly doing weather reports and weather checks, because there's only, even in that 15 minutes, the weather can change so much that what happens is the planes can come in, they come in and miss, they do that sharp drop down, and boom, they hit the runway. And that's what it's like. And the proximity meters are turned off in the aircraft, because otherwise they'd be flashing all the time. And Danny, one of the crew, as we got in the plane, he goes, "Oh no, is that our plane?" "Yes, it is, Danny. In you go." There's no way out. Obviously, you don't see me in the plane in that part, but obviously I was in Lukla. So we arrive in Lukla, and what a lot of tourists can do is a very basic hike towards the Everest Base Camp. So you can go from Lukla over to Monjo, Namche Pazar, Tembosch, and you do all of that various route until you get up to Everest Base Camp, and that's how it works. But what I wanted to do as part of the trekking was to go off the accepted tourist route, because I wanted to look in areas where there may be evidence of the Yeti, yeah? I'm not just interested in a big hike, yeah? That's not what I've signed on for. I'm interested in looking for evidence of the creature. So I think, if I had to impart one thing, there wasn't a lot in the show about the eyewitnesses interviews that we had, but one of the things that because the show flowed really well, and I think it did a really good job. But one of the things I say to you, and I'll talk about this more, is that there was a consistency. I talked to you earlier on about the fact that I've done a lot of cross-examination, and that was my job. So I cross-examine witnesses very thoroughly. I don't sit there and go, "Tell me everything you know," and "oh yes, that's true." I'll give them a critical evaluation, respectfully, but I'll give them a critical evaluation of the things that they say. And what I was encouraged by, with at least two of the eyewitnesses, I thought were quite pertinent, and both had seen a Yeti-like creature recently, and I'll come on to this at the end. But they talked about the conical head, they talked about the musculature, they talked about its height, at least over 6 foot, but big. And to them, 6 foot's big, yeah? They're quite small normally as individuals. So they talked about the way it walks, and one of the things that they said was about the rapidity and fluidity of movement. So, they'll talk about how they'd seen a Yeti walk across the ridgeline, but it had moved so rapidly, it was covered in dark hair. Please don't say fur. Please don't say fur, dark hair. And it moved very rapidly as it walked, yeah? And they talked about that, and I spent a long time, I spent a couple of hours talking to some of these witnesses. And that was the thing that, I'll come on to questions at the end, and that was the thing that I thought was really, really important when I got to grips with that. The Yeti is not white, yeah? Let me just say right now, I said that as one of the things, I know there have been a few accounts in Tibet, blah, 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 but the Yeti is not white, yeah? It's normally dark or brown-haired, and the other distinction I'd make, I've worked with Brian Sykes before, and there was a lot of talk about his study proving the existence of the Yeti being an ancient bear, yeah? That was one of the things that they said. Now, if we go back to the legends, there are in fact several types of Yeti, yeah? And one of them is a bear, yeah? But one of the other ones talks about the fact that there's a bipedal primate, yeah? That makes that very clear distinction between the Yeti who's a bear and the one who's a bipedal primate, yeah? And there could be up to 3, but he didn't prove any of that. Basically what he was saying was that there was a species of Arctic bear that may well be discovered, but in fact the Yeti is a bipedal primate, and that's what I've always thought. So there was a particular area, one of the things that I found, and you'll see on the show, is that there was an area around the village of Monjo, which is a small village in that area. And in Monjo, there's a river system. Now, that was where, on Destination Truth, Josh's guide Tool, the Sherpa Tool, found a print, yeah? And I spent a lot of time talking to Tool, and I can say, with all sincerity, I think Tool was telling the truth. None of that was staged. I know people say, was TV staged? That was not staged. That was a genuine find. We genuinely found it. We found it on the riverbed there. We went to that riverbed, but since then, as I'm sure a lot of you know, there's been an earthquake in Nepal, so that area was now rock. But if you go up that riverbed, I said, well, when we do the trekking sequence, I don't want an entourage, because we had this massive entourage of Nepali people, not just Sherpas. We had the Ministry of Forestry and Fisheries, we had the Culture Minister representatives, we had all these people. And I said, right, for the tracking sequence, what I want to do is if all of these people stay back, yeah, I want Tool, Josh, and myself to do that, and maybe a couple of camera crew following behind us. But I want everybody to stay back so we can concentrate on that. And I'm walking on the riverbed, and the thing that I love is tracking. Yeah, I've loved tracking since I was a child, teenager, and I teach my daughter who's 12 to go tracking, and I teach the importance of mountain discipline. I talk about the fact that how people cannot, the most common way people die from coming down a mountain is descending, not ascending. All of those principles that are important. But I came across the print, and you've seen it on the show, many of you. And one of the things I'd say is, it's easy to make assumptions. And a lot of people say to me, I saw a Bigfoot print, yeah? I saw a Bigfoot print, it was a Bigfoot print. And I say, you have to be careful, because unless you physically saw the Bigfoot walking at that time as it was making it, you can't be 100% sure it was a Bigfoot print, yeah? You have to consider all the other things it could be before you come to those conclusions. But I think, what I'd say with my legal head on the balance of probabilities, I think it was a Yeti print, was because of its shape and size. You've seen all of those, because of the long toes and the slightly distended hallux there. It was there. There was nothing else in that area that could have made that print. I came across it fresh. The Nepalese didn't know where I was going. Nobody could have faked that. So I think, given the circumstances, it was a Yeti print, and I'm comfortable enough to say that that's my considered opinion, not fact, on the balance of probabilities. Do you see how I've done that? Yeah, I've not said a sweeping statement. I've considered it in that way, and I think and I was really buzzed by that. Let me tell you, one of the big, I'm sure a lot of you do Bigfoot research. It's such a buzz when you find something, and it's exciting like that. it's super exciting. So I was very, very pleased about that. And when I consider all of that, I was very encouraged, because what I found there was I'd found some credible eyewitnesses. I'd found an area, what I think is, and again this is speculation on my part, but if I was going to go back to Nepal, I found an area around that place where there'd been consistent sightings of the Yeti, where there had been tangible, possible physical evidence of it found on several occasions. And what I think it does is, in the dry season, it goes down to this river area to feed and forage and drink water, yeah? Because obviously it's at the end of the dry season, and that's a place where it goes, yeah? At night, that's a place where it goes. And that was where we were finding evidence. So I was encouraged. I came away before I sent the expedition unknown crew out. I was like, "Are we going to find anything?" And I even said to the crew, "We may not find it. I want you to know that." But we did find those things. So, if you take away one positive about these things, and one of the things I imparted to Jeff in my opinion about this stuff was that I think there could well be, right now, a viable population of these creatures operating in that locale, which is enormously encouraging for me, as a researcher. I can't be sure. These are all assumptions I've made based on the evidence I've found. And again, this is just a hypothesis. It should be tested, it should be analysed, it should be open to independent scientific corroboration. All of these things should be there. But that is how I felt about it. So that was great. Afterwards, you see us doing some rappelling. There's a couple of amusing things in that. And that rappel I looked over the rappel as we're standing over that. And when crazy things go through your head, because I was obviously going off to San Diego to get married, and my wife's called Nadia. I looked over and I looked over and I looked at this thing. I looked down this sheer face, and I thought, oh shit, if I die here, Nadia's going to kill me. It's just, and that was what I thought. And then as I'm going down the rappel, the camera crew at the bottom, and obviously they didn't do the rappel, and my combat trousers are falling down. You can see my backside, and one of them shouts, Brian shouts, he's the cameraman, he goes, "Adam, pull your pants up, this is a family show!" So you can't see the cutaway when I'm laughing into the rock face. So it was all good fun. There's probably there's a scene in it which was a little bit risque, but again I asked Craig for permission to tell this story, which I shot, which was, I don't think it'll be in the show. But if it, because as you see me leave the show and all as I go away, but there's this scene where the producer says, "Oh, we want you to eat some of the local delicacies," and I was like, "Oh yeah, here we go." When they say local delicacies, you know where we're going with that. So I decided to wind Josh up. So Josh is very quick, yeah. But I decided to wind him up. So I told him I was going to wind him up as this thing, so he was ready for it. But Tool gets these frogs from the river, yeah, and he starts frying these frogs. Tool starts frying these frogs, and they're like bits of them and everything like that. And I said to Josh, I said, so are you a breast or a leg man when it comes to frogs or something like that? He goes, "I'm a leg man," and he pulls the frog's legs out, and I was like, "Oh, he's got the best bit of the frog," So I said, "Oh, I'm going to take my frog from behind, bite into this frog," and the crew are all killing themselves laughing, they're like falling off doing this. But again, I don't think they're going to show that. But I wish they had, because it was one of the funniest things I've ever filmed. We were literally falling about doing it. We went to, there's a mention of Namche Bazaar in the thing. I'd just caution you. The reason I'm going to mention Namche Bazaar is I'd caution you about this. Is a lot of hikers go to Namche Bazaar and say, "Oh, it's great. It's like the rip-off town, Everything's like 3 or 4 times the price because poor exhausted hikers have made it to Namche Bazaar, but they do pizzas, and I had Yak Pizza, and it was good, It was not as good as Tex-Mex, I can say, but it was about the best thing I could eat when I was there. And obviously, you'll see later on in the film, I can't tell you the results of testing for hair samples. Again, it's unprofessional. So please don't ask. You'll have to wait to see the outcome of the show, and I shouldn't do that. So, but you'll see that analysis later on. And you'll see Josh obviously go off to Bhutan, lucky bugger, as we say in England, and you'll see all of that. And it's very beautiful, Bhutan. So you'll see those amazing things. One of the things I'd say very briefly is that, you know, when we talk about what the Yeti is, the thing that I want to impart, and I'll talk a little bit about this when I do my talk tomorrow about Wildman of the World. When I was at school, there was this very simple evolutionary chart, which had ape-like creatures gradually coming up to this wonderful creature, which is us, yeah? And that was it. And then, well, even Craig. This wonderful creature that is Craig, this shining example of humanity who stands before you, who is obviously the paradigm of evolution, and he stood here today. But the thing I'd say to you is, you know, if I had to sort of speculate about what the Yeti might be, I think, and again this is speculation based on my opinion, is you know, it's not a bear. I've already talked to you about the fact that there are legends about bears and different types of bears there. I think it's bipedal. It may well be one of our early ancestors in some way, because there's different branches. We've talked, you know, when I was a kid, there was us at the end. Then we've talked about Neanderthal, and we've talked about Denisovans and all of these things that have come along. Flores man, I spoke to Henry G. when that first came out. I've researched the orang pendek, and I think I think that's an example of parallel evolution. So there are all of these things. You know, our scientific knowledge, I think, one of the most encouraging things in the last 20 years has increased exponentially about our understanding. And when people challenge you, the one thing I'd say to you is, when people challenge you about, could a Bigfoot exist, or could any of these things exist, I say, take a step back, because those people who are challenging you about the possibility are intellectually lazy. Because all I'm saying for something like the existence of the Yeti is that in these remote parts of the world, and remember, of course, America was a wilderness until an eye blink, there are these creatures that could exist. They're undoubtedly very rare, and that's all we are saying. And there is nothing kooky about that notion. In fact, it is a very reasonable principle. So all of you who do that research are considering very reasonable principles. The thing that I'd say to you is, when you get this evidence, it is very important that when we're gathering this evidence, having said all of that, is that it's independently scientifically corroborated, and it is testable, and the evidence that you have is capable of replication by others, yeah? And you have to be able to do peer review. Don't sit on your evidence, yeah? You have to be prepared to share your data, and share it is a very profound point I'd make to you, and have it assessed carefully. But I came away very, very encouraged from the Expedition Unknown about the viability of a Yeti. The jury was out mentally for me before I went, having been on the Monster Quest trip, but now I'm hugely encouraged. And it's a great privilege to do these expeditions all over the world. And I'm going to continue doing them. Thank you very much.
Amen.